For me, it was a Hail Mary. I was just throwing something into the universe and see what comes back. So I suppose my journey in design started in school, and we largely got exposure on how to think about problems and people and how they experience the world. There were a couple times where I was disappointed because I would get a mark back because I didn't tick certain boxes.
In 2018, you founded Designing Humans. What was the inspiration for starting that?
One of my design directors said to me, you're not designing experiences or products, you're designing humans. You cannot be in an effective relationship without knowing yourself really, really well. And if you want to build products that people love, will pay you disproportionately more money than somebody else's product, you've got to know what is creating that product. I love mistakes. If it wasn't for my mistakes, I wouldn't know half the things I know.
Welcome to Pixelated Path, where designers discover how to turn passion into meaningful careers. I'm Chris Abad, and today I'm thrilled to have Dean Broadley on the show, a designer whose journey began at just 15, drawing comics he now describes as terrible. Together, we'll explore Dean's path from a curious student breaking the rules to a respected leader in the industry. We'll dive into how Dean embraced mistakes, challenged conventional thinking, and cultivated a unique approach to leadership and design. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss inspiring stories and practical advice we share each week. Let's jump in. Dean, your journey into design started back in 2008 with Formula D Interactive. What first brought you into design? Like where did your interest come from?
Yeah, it's a funny story. So I suppose my journey in design started in school where I was not paying attention. In some class, we had a substitute teacher who happened to be the design teacher. My high school had design and art, which was kind of a rare thing. He was just like, you should think about doing design as a subject when you get to choose your subjects. And so I got into design then, and I was doing largely illustration, character design, and I got really into manga, anime, these kinds of things. Sound design as well. That was the great thing about that design class. You could do whatever, whenever. There was a book on anything. Exposure on how to think about problems and people and how they experience the world. When I started my first paid design job was to do some comic book work, and I was 15 years old. I was terrible looking back at it. But at the time, like, oh, I'll do that. And then I started studying advertising. And when I was studying advertising, I realized that the institution was really focused on very traditional advertising. That was just what was happening. So billboards, TV ads, magazines, etc. And you could kind of branch into art direction, or you could go into visual communications, specifically design. And I wanted to go that route. And so in 2008, I basically found Formula D online because I always really liked technology, and they were doing some really interesting installation college, and then converted from some form of traditional means, whether it was a magazine, and turned it into something digital, like a website or a flash site or an animation or a video or whatever. And that's how I got into working in like my first design job and kind of studying at the same time, because I was not satisfied with two things, I suppose. I didn't want to leave and do an internship. I wanted to leave and have a job. And the kind of predictable or prescribed path was you study, you do some kind of customer brief while you study, and then you go do an internship at an agency, and then maybe they'll hire you, or maybe you go find a job somewhere else. And I thought it was quite an expensive path to get a job. So I figured I'd do something else, and it did work out. So that's kind of where I started.
So the coursework that you were getting in university, originally the assignments were print media or some sort of traditional medium, and then you would turn back and deliver something new media, something digital. How did that work out?
Correct.
Like, was that
It was mixed. I mean, it was mixed. It was yeah, look, I think looking back, it feels even to me more deliberate than I think it was at the time. I kind of just certain things make sense to me, and then I do them, and then afterwards I go, okay, maybe that didn't make sense to the earth, but it made sense to me at the time. And so in first year, you weren't allowed to touch a computer really at our varsity, and so we did have the early stage at the end of first year, some DTP style stuff, desktop publishing, old Emacs in the corner of the floor that we were on, and then lecturer basically said he was teaching us stuff, and he gave us like a task to do some deep etching and stuff, and it was supposed to be a 2-week thing, and I finished it in the class in the hour. And then he was like, I'm going to give you more stuff. And then I finished that. And so that's also what prompted me to go find something else that was outside the university, because I had a sense that I wasn't going to learn the things I was keen to learn at the rate I wanted to learn them. So then when I would get these briefs, especially in my second year, my lecturer was incredibly open-minded. She was fantastic. She also, I remember doing one brief where I had to do packaging, and mine was very science fiction. It was packaging for food, but it was all shaped in like cocoons of butterflies and moths. And it was all biodegradable and all these things. And she was like, I really don't like sci-fi things, but I think I'm going to have to learn if you're going to be my student. And so then I was like, okay, cool. What if I change these things into stuff that I'm learning outside? And she was like, well, see how it goes. And so there were a couple briefs or people in the institution that were quite fixed in their mindset, which makes sense. They'd been there for very long and they'd come out of traditional advertising. Lots of prescribed views on what the role of a designer was. If you were going to go into an agency, it's like, oh, the art director has the ideas and you make them real. And I never liked that kind of mindset. I was like, I can also think. And I, right? So the problem that was given to the entire class, I still had to figure out how to tell that without the rest of the constraints of the brief, right? Whether that be, it must have this many, it was a zine and it had to have this many pages or this many chapters and this many illustrations. I had to like think about what that actually meant with no real guidance other than the internet. And at that point, the internet was slow. So there wasn't a whole bunch of YouTube to watch and download. So yeah, I think it really went that way. I mean, a couple of my classmates, one or two, were a little bit like, I think you're just doing this digital thing so you don't have to print and pay for printing and go stand in the queue at the printer and sort these things out. And I was like, sure, we can take that, but that's not really why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because I'm interested in it. And there were a couple times where I was disappointed because I would get a mark back for something and it wouldn't be all that good because I didn't tick certain boxes.
I'm sort of interested in how you approached Formula D initially. Like, where did, as a kid in college, where did the inspiration to call up an agency and just ask if you could pull up a chair and sit and learn? Like, where did that come from?
Well, if I'm remembering correctly, either on their website or on YouTube or something, because I can't remember what for the life of me what I searched for. I was definitely looking for what jobs were out there, something really innovative, something really interesting. And at the time, they had this thing that turned a holographic projection screen. It's essentially a pane of glass with a transparent film that picks up light from a projector, but anything black would be transparent. And I remember watching the video, and it was also touch. So I think it used, if I remember correctly, an infrared frame to kind of pick up XY coordinates for a touch. So I was like, this is Minority Report. It lives. It's real. I want to do that thing. And so then went to the website, found an email, and yeah, I just emailed them. And I think it's just my nature, I suppose. Like, I don't really see some boundaries that I think other people do. And also was, for me, it was a Hail Mary. I was just throwing something into the universe and see what comes back, kind of. And they were small and they were interested. And I think they probably on some level like, ooh, free was quite nice because they were on the way from my house to my varsity, my university. So I basically get on my scooter, go to the office, do some stuff, come to university, do some classes, go back. It's all one route. So I didn't have to change like, oh, that happened. Okay, learned from it, move on. But yeah, that was kind of thing. And I remember being super excited and then them going, oh, sure. And we'll pay you. I remember that being a big moment because I was just like, I'll just sit there just to watch how that's made. I have no clue. I don't even know where to start. And they let me come. And yeah, so that was how it went.
This idea of not seeing boundaries that maybe other people do. Do you know where that came from? Like, is that something you just always had growing up? Is it something you developed while you were in university?
I think spending a lot of time with my grandmother in the holidays. She's a very strong human being with very clear views and doesn't really care what others think of her, especially if they're negative things. And so I think, I learned a lot about if you want to do a thing, you go do it. If people tell you no, you can care or you can ask why to kind of understand. But if you really want to do it, you go do it. If you make more value than people can ignore, then everything else works out. And so always tried things, always go do things that are in front of me. I've always been very curious. And I think my curiosity has always trumped my apprehension. I like to think things through, but I like to make things to learn. So I think that's also been kind of like in the early days, I'm trying to find work or just trying to think about what I want to do as a profession because I didn't really have a plan, if I'm honest. Even applying to university, my father said I can be anything I want as long as it's got the word engineer in it. And then I applied at advertising college and didn't tell him, and I didn't apply. And I didn't apply anywhere else. And it kind of just worked out again. I did some stuff, did an interview, made a portfolio, and then those things landed. So, yeah. And I think I've always found that if you make things, it facilitates a conversation. And in that conversation, you can learn a new thing and make a new thing. And I think that's where the low boundaries are for me. I also, even in high school, I would go and work at like events and stuff that I had no business working at as a person under the age of 18. But I would go and do that. I think largely because I grew to the height I am now by the age of 13. So I was a lot taller than anybody else my age for a while until I got to probably mid high school. And I think that also gave me a level of confidence because people kind of treat you differently. Also, as like being an only child, then the oldest in our family nucleus, its expectations are, you know, get your stuff in order, sort it out. And I grew up in a quite a supportive environment, but also very independent human beings in our family. So you've got a lot of examples of just go do the thing. Nobody else is going to ask you. Nobody's going to give it to you. Nobody's going to create the space for you. You've got to do it. And that's probably what's informed a fair amount of that. I mean, it's not without its strife, not without its fear, and it's, you do fail and then you doubt yourself. But then that's, I think, part of the journey. You've got to kind of go, okay, what's the why behind those things or those events or those situations? And then see what you can get out of it. I think I learned quite early on that I've had this view that things are only useless if you can't make use of them, which seems like a simple statement, but there's an element of like masking that goes on. I think now when I look back at it, where you just kind of go mask to be in a situation, a social situation, but to do that well, you've kind of got to really pay attention to people. And then that also means that you can just go do things that other people who are constrained to a specific circumstance or outlook can't kind of move through. And that sticks with me today. And I think that's why with leading teams and managing people, that is my orientation to my team. And just also just getting an organization to get the most out of what we do. I just go and do it. And then people go, oh, that works. Can we have more of that? Rather than the other way of let me convince you through some method of storytelling, which is what they need to do for this online banking system, this new one, for the redesign. And I said, I did brief them. He says, no, but they said you haven't. I said, no, I did. He said, what did you brief them? I said, go design it. That's what I told the team, and I moved on. And in my mind, that was the brief, because that was the brief I got. And that's what I would have made use of and then gone to do the rest of it. The rest of it was just method and curiosity and research and all the other things. But that was the first moment where I went, oh, wait, that all happens in my head. I actually have to help people do that for themselves and then for the company.
Early in your career, did you notice a lack of humanness in tech?
It's an interesting question. My first response is no. And the reason is, I think maybe because I was having so much fun and I was so curious about what we were making and the how does we make and the technology involved that I maybe didn't see it. And I started out in communication. So it was all storytelling and people stories and brand stories and these things. And so I felt that to be quite human. What I would say my first proper tech job was when I worked at Mix. It was a social media chat platform, kind of. It was before, it was in the early smartphones, before Facebook and these things. It was actually came out when I was in school. It was massive in our country. And then that would be the first place where I like worked with a whole team of engineers and, product people and these kinds of things. There were elements in there that did make me think, okay, but is this about the people using the thing, or is this about find that it was like, oh, you didn't read the book, you didn't do this thing. I was like, well, that book wasn't available to me when I was coming up. So I just figured it out. And I found that trumped the thing we were making, the problem we we're solving, who we were solving it for, the business we were solving it for also, in the thing that pays your salary at the end of the day. And I found designers being more kind of egotistical in a way, or like just very stuck on the craft and not on the problems they were solving. That's a generalization, but I was on the receiving end of that because I also would apply for a job, not get it, or not be allowed to go to an event or speak at an event because it's like, oh, well, you're talking about these things that are not interesting. And then 3, 4 years later, somebody go, you applied to do this talk about like the business of design. And then this is really cool now. Do you want to talk about it? And at that time, I think, especially that stage of my career, I was like, no, I've moved on. And so I think that's where I've experienced the most kind of inhumaneness. And then I've worked in banking. And
In 2018, you founded Designing Humans. What was the inspiration for starting that?
okay, so that's, yeah. So that was while I was working in banking. And one of my design directors at that time, the team I was running was about 150, 160 odd design people in across countries and every facet of the bank, from branch experience to corporate investment banking, lending, everything. And I was hated it. And one of my design directors said to me, you're not designing experiences or products, you're designing humans. So that's literally where the name came from. Because my key skill really is people. And I started the company because I learned through extending my network and talking to other people that people really struggle to get design teams working. And a lot that we had figured out in that team, I'd rather make the entire pool bigger, which increases the ability to the catchment zone for talent. And so I started this thing to do two things, to kind of go, well, how do we widen the funnel for talent without narrowing the standard, right? So how do you cast the net wider, but funnel people through on the same fundamental? That's when I got really interested in careers, etc. And then how do you organize teams so that businesses get a whole bunch of value, people are doing work that they're proud of, and those teams are resilient on values, culture, principles, ways of work, process, tooling, etc. And so that was why I started that. It also got me to think about storytelling a lot more in business and outside of an individual business. It got me to use the skill that I really, really lean on, which is reframing. And because I can reframe it, I'll show you the other side of any coin you give me. And sometimes that works to my disadvantage, especially if I'm frustrated, then I just get cynical. But I do leverage that to this day to move things forward. And so that's where Designing Humans came from. And there were a whole bunch of different things we did, different, again, leading people to make short-term gains.
What are some examples of the activities or the new processes or structures you would put in place? Like how would you actually do some of these things that you're talking about?
Yeah, if I'm in the room with a group of people, I can pretty quickly figure out why that system's not working, because 9 times out of 10, each other. Nothing to do with what you drew on a slide. It's got to do with availability. So I always said there's that COM-B model. It's like capability, opportunity, motivation. And so what I would do is really get into the landscape of the organization and then where the team is at, and then use some available tools in terms of assessing maturity of activities, etc. Run workshops. I go, okay, cool, where are we at? What are the kinds of things that frustrate you? What are the things that are giving you energy? What are the things that are draining you as an individual? And then working a lot with design leaders, because often also those jobs are quite lonely. And you're also, for two reasons. One, leadership in general can feel lonely, but two, in an emerging skill set, it's even more so, because the person often managing you doesn't know where you need to go and what you need to do. So I would spend a fair amount of time there and then start kind of using some known concepts in kind of unexpected ways, whether that be, okay, we're going to look at how does agile and design work together, like one of the classic ones, and then either completely divorce it where it needs to be and do a bit of agile for one part of your team and a bit of not on the other, so you can do your design thinking and your design labor is kind of how I tend to frame them. You need both. And then some of the other things I would do is arm people with story that they could bring into the organization. If you say to an organization that doesn't know what you're quote unquote meant to be doing or doesn't yet see the value, and then you start advocating and evangelizing for it, they immediately don't listen to you. Because I've never seen a finance person advocate and evangelize finance, or an HR person advocate and evangelize HR. They just do the job and then present it as not necessarily as fact, but they present the value. But what I do is then like arm people with stories so they can also both think about their skill set differently and then deploy it into an organization in a way that goes, oh, I told this story in this way. And all of a sudden they're going, yeah, we should try that. Or I asked my team this question about their careers. So one of the things is that people can get stuck on careers, and I always frame them as a choose your own adventure book. The pages are all the same for everybody, but the path you choose is what you're marketing to the world. And so that's really what I would do. I would go and sit, and then I would think of story coupled with process and reconcile it with the spreadsheet, and then go, cool, you can only have half of that. That means we can only do half of this within reason, because it's not always as black and white as that. And then my aim is always to leave any environment so that it doesn't need me anymore. And so that's kind of how I would always operate, at least on that for the most part.
You've talked a lot about self awareness and how important that is. Why is self awareness so important in actually creating better products?
That's a really good question, because it's a relationship, and you cannot be in any relationship, in an effective relationship, without knowing yourself really, really well. And if you want to build products that people love, will pay you disproportionately more money than somebody else's product, you've got to know what is creating that product, right? So structure, all these things are a symptom, in my view, of culture and and by extension, the people that make those things. And so as teams, you've got to know yourselves to then know each other. You've got to have each other to be able to spot blind spots, and then basically create, I always say it's like literal perspective. So widening your field of view. And so the more you know about yourselves, and as an organization, the more you know about yourself, the more you've widened your field of view to be able to interact with the market, and the more honest conversations you can have with your customers. Because you will also accept a failing when you should, because you'll be able to go, yes, that we did badly. That does not mean we are bad people, but it means we did that thing badly and we should improve it. And that's just really important. I think, obviously, in team relationships and management relationships, it's super important. It's like everything. I've had a couple managers in my life that just did not have self awareness, and I always feel for them because it feels very hard and tiring to be that person. But that's really the arc for me, is that somebody's buying a thing, and even down to things that feel on the surface very transactional. The self-awareness lets you also realize, it's something I've said hundreds of times, I think, is that we ask permission to participate in the lives of our customers. They're not thinking about us. And I mean, in advertising, we would push the other direction, right? To be front of mind and always in the face of our customer. But we're not that important. And that's okay. And I think that's really why it's super important, because back to my comment earlier about what I found with design people who are designing products and experiences, it's not about you. And self awareness, the higher your self awareness, the more you should realize that. And so you don't try and impose the full design process on every single thing in your company. You learn to sense that this is about that person, because that person's who we're trying to sell to, and they have a problem. Also, organizationally, what are the other opportunities? How do we widen our field of view on this thing, this problem, this customer problem, logistical problem, and a support problem, whatever it may be, and then ask permission to participate in the market in a different way. And I don't mean, again, that in the same way that I say you shouldn't like advocate and evangelize. I just mean you are participating. And when you understand, so that's the big thing for me with self-awareness, is that you are a participant in the world and in your own life. You want to really not get stuck with any form of external locus of control, because the recipe for going nowhere. So yeah, I think that's the major thing for me. It's just the wider field of view, awareness that you are not the most important thing in your customer's life, and the fact that there are other people around you that can bring things to be able to achieve what you're trying to achieve as a team or a company or as a product.
If someone wanted to improve their self awareness, like what's something that someone could do tomorrow to have a higher sense of self awareness?
So one thing, there's probably three things. The main thing is, I mean, there are many tools out there. There are many frameworks. One that I've leaned on repeatedly is the Johari window, which is the four quadrants. But the thing about that is just like I've actually drawn it very differently to how it's usually presented, which is but how you widen the top left quadrant, which is the kind of like known knowns. So one of the things I try to do is weekly, most weeks on a Friday in the afternoon, I will spend probably 30 minutes to an hour thinking about the week and go, what really frustrated me? what really made me excited or happy, whether that be with my team, with an individual, with a piece of work, and then just jotting that down. Just the act of doing that is already getting it out of your brain. And then you're looking at it as if somebody else wrote it in a way. Then finding two people, one that you trust implicitly and is like your ride or die thinking partner, if you will, and then one person who you really don't get along with because that person's going to tell you what they think. And so is the person who you trust. The truth, though, is between their two perspectives, I find. It also lets you disclose to others where you're stuck, right? Or where you're frustrated. And by, again, disclosing it to others, you take a thing that is maybe hidden from their view and their perspective about you, and you put it out. And that can be, it's a lot easier said than done. But that's why you have the trusted person, because they should give you the confidence to go and then have the conversation with the person you're not in the safer relationship with. So yeah, I think that those are the like two things. And I think the third thing is to also just give yourself a break. I find that if you get stuck on the idea that you're not the person you want to be stuck, like they're really stuck and struggling in their career, because I'm like, oh, I can go help. And then I'll go sit and I will give them. I mean, one of my designers, my design leads now, she said to the team, she's like, guys, just got to remember, we're all guinea pigs to Dean. He's just poking us and testing us to see where we're going to go next. And I really enjoyed that because I just enjoyed the sarcasm and it's my nature too. But it was just more of a case of going, I will provide a situation that will help reflect in a safe environment, because if I can stretch you, then that means that you're more marketable, means my team's stronger, more resilient. And I always say that I am long-term lazy. I will work very hard so I don't have to work again. So I will work and invest in people so that you do not need me and you can just do this without me. And then I can go solve another problem, because I still remain intensely curious. And yeah, if I can get more time in my greenhouse to work with my plants, that's also great.
What does that look like to find someone who's stuck through the interview process?
They seem like they're held together with elastic bands, rubber bands. And that's like an anxiety thing. And so I find that an anxiety, when it's at a point where it's holding that person back, I tend to be able to bring a calmness and a reframe that really helps them feel safe, etc., and then work through that. And then I think the last one is just the genuinely like, I wish somebody would help me kind of person in an interview or in a team where they're like, I'm missing something, or I just really want to get better. Somebody who's motivated to just get better. Those are really the three that I think I pick up the most. And obviously, many different nuances and flavors and backgrounds, but those would be the pillars that I kind of find, and then use the environment and the work that they're on to help create the teachable moments again. And then use storytelling. I'm often drawing analogy from everything from plants to cars to, I used one on the Titanic the other day, which had to do with perspective of being in the engine room versus on the deck just after the iceberg hit. Some people are running around screaming and others are drinking champagne. And I think that that's just like the thing that I enjoy the most, because if I can get that unlock, in fact, I even have a final toy on my desk here, which person who worked in my team about, I don't know, 10 years ago, sent something to my house, and they did it with a note that just said, you had a conversation with me about something I was stuck on 6 years ago, 7 years ago, whatever the time frame was. I didn't get it then, but I get it now, and it makes all the sense, and it's completely changed how I think about myself. And I was like, oh, that's very nice. I didn't even know I had that conversation. It was at some team function, social thing. But it meant a lot to me that it meant a lot to that person. So now it sits on my desk as a reminder that like seemingly mundane moments can also really be meaningful to people. And so those are the kinds of people and situations. And yeah, I'm not afraid to push people is another thing. I will ask you to run, I'm going to use our measurements, 20 kilometers. You think you can run? And I will, yeah, just poke people to get them kind of like clutched out of where they're in. I have one designer in my team. I was talking to him today, and we're just the first week I was in this team now. He was sitting at a desk, struggling with a problem, and I saw him, and he was like, oh, I'm trying to figure this out. And then I went to a meeting, came back, he was still there, struggling with the problem. Then I left and did another thing, another one-on-one, because I was meeting all the people in my team and other people in the business. Came back, he was sitting there, and I went over to his book and I wrote on his book, try harder. And he looked at me and he was like, so rude. This is exactly what I'm doing. I'm like, yeah, and you're getting no different result. Therefore, we should do something different. You are trying very hard. But I was just trying to reinforce this thing of you're clearly trying hard, but you're not pivoting. And that's kind of my nature. And so that method of reframe and also just like holding the thing you're doing right in front of your face so you can almost see it for the first time, I find just helps people go, oh, snap out of it. Participate, like I said earlier.
What's scary about being pushed as far as what you're talking about is there's more opportunity or more likelihood to make mistakes along the way. How do you help teams get comfortable with like accepting mistakes and using those as learning opportunities?
You mistakes through a lens of fear. Um, One thing I've said to many of my teams is like if anything that could go wrong was the actual end of the world, you'd know because there would be zombies. So until you see a zombie, it's not a Slack message, it's not a design review, it's not your prototype, it's just not the end of the world. And I operate on just the implicit assumption that I'm going to make a mistake. I have no clue what the mistake is. I just know it's coming. But what that lets me do is start. And that is the thing that I try to get people doing. Like I said to my team to the end of the year, I think we had 5 weeks left of the kind of like the year before people start all going on December break. And I just gave them two phrases that I said to them. I was like, just get stuck in. There's no time for perfection. There's only time for effectiveness. Even if you break something, but you learn something that is more effective than it being perfect. And then the other thing I said was just communicate, 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 because if you don't speak up, I can't hear it and I cannot fix things I don't know about into the world. That includes your mistakes. So when you made a quote unquote wrong turn, or when you hit a pothole and you learned how to change a tire in that moment, somebody who didn't do that may not have learned that, right? And that thing, the mistakes are a thing that make you more powerful. It's a pain, but it's a cognitive pain. And we understand this about physical fitness, that if you're unfit and you go and you run and you exercise, you feel pain. And then you go, oh, that was a great workout. But for some reason, cognitively, we're like, oh my gosh, it's all death and destruction if I get something wrong. That for me is just a fitness issue. And that's also another way that I just try to frame it to my team is like, oh, it probably feels uncomfortable because you just haven't done it before. And that's okay. And the other thing is I will never call somebody out for trying. I will call them out for not trying or repeating a mistake without pivoting in some way. I don't care if you come to the same conclusion. I care that your methods are shifting because then you're creating coverage in your problem solving, your awareness, other people in. And then the last thing I'll say is that in my teams, especially, is like your mistake's my mistake. We own it together. I'm just going to push us. And if it breaks, I was part of that. I was there pushing. So if I pushed us too far and it broke, I'm not going to turn around and say that was your fault. I was a participant. I'm in the same vehicle you are. We're all just trying to figure out this thing together. But I guess my thing is just like if I can see someone doing the repeat thing, running into the same wall, but then not taking ownership for their role in participating, then I use a very different thing. So either I've got to step in or I've got to pair up with someone. No matter what your level is, I'll pair anybody with anybody to get a thing done correctly and learn something together. And yeah, I think that's just the most important thing to me is like I think most people just learn when they make that mistake. Now, if the environment is completely unsafe, the mistakes are terrible. They're traumatic. And I've been in those environments too. I think I've just, again, got a natural disposition to not care that other people have a problem with my mistakes. And that's helped me a lot, I think. But I am also aware of how it can genuinely harm people. I mean, I've had things in my career, I've been told things in interviews that were incredibly offensive and stuff, and they've sat with me for a while. And that's you're apprehensive, but eventually I get to the point of going, but maybe that was their nonsense, not mine. I just figure out something else to do or pivot. So yeah, I mean, I love mistakes. I'll just put it simply. I mean, if it wasn't for my mistakes, I wouldn't know half the things I know.
How do you feel like your leadership style has evolved as you've led different teams over the years?
It's interesting. I've always been a partner leader, if that makes sense. I would say the very first thing I would call leadership was when I was an intern, actually. And then I became a junior. So that was during studies. And then I was a junior at an agency. And oh, yes, I remember now. So my friend who was studying with me, we both went to the same agency and we were juniors. And then the next wave of interns came in. And for some reason, organically or just via my nature, I ended up running that intern kind of like group. And I think it's because I looked at some of them and I was like, they were getting feedback from our creative director or our executive creative director and very disheartened they hadn't landed it. And I was just like, what? This is so that people understand that the nature of your relationship is quite specific, actually, especially as you're responsible for more things. I do operate on a very kind of implicit trust so that people come and ask me things and then I will just call things out. That's, I think, the thing that's always been true, but has changed in the nuance of how I apply it. So, what I would do in like a full team session versus in a one on one, those things I've nuanced. And then I think very much down to the person as well. Like, I used to have a far more blanket approach, right? But I've learned a lot about how people work, their neurological makeups, their psychology, their backgrounds, etc., to be able to go, this person is operating this way. The method needs to be a bit different. This person needs just a very direct wake up call. This person needs more opportunity to think or a reframe. I think, you know, I've got two people in my team that I was just one person who I always say thinks in the 5-dimensional universe and then draws the 5-dimensional universe and then takes that 5-dimensional universe picture and then shows it to stakeholders. Then they're overwhelmed. And then they are made to feel like, wrong. This is too much. We need it more succinct. We need it simplified. And the thing is that person can't think simplified. They can only think. And that's a superpower. So all I was like, well, that's your method. That's not your product. And so reframing that help the person go, oh, it's okay for me to do these things. It's okay for me to draw out every single state of every single thing and think these things through. But the thing I am selling is not that. And I think those things, giving people permission, I think that's been the thing that's always been true, but definitely nuanced to out. Fit is also a thing I think I've gotten better at, like as I've progressed through my journey, just understanding that people need to be fit for an environment because again, in my view, it's a relationship. It's largely a commercial relationship between the individual and the company, but they're all still human beings. And so I've gotten good at communicating to people that the fit might be off and the cost benefit ratio for you and for the company doesn't add up and we should find you something else. Not because you're broken or wrong and there's no actual conflict. I just, again, present it to the person and go, let's try this. This didn't work. This is why I think. Do you agree? Yes or no? And then get them to kind of find their fit because I've watched people be incredibly terrible at their jobs in some places and then go to another company and be fantastic. And what I think the best outcome in those scenarios is that they look at that previous experience only as a learning and not as a slight against them. And the company sees it that way too, because it's just fit. You and the company were not fit. They didn't slot correctly due to timing, skill, needs, or whatever. These things don't add up. And as you're moving through your career, I think the other thing that's evolved in my leadership journey is I always say, like, people with a lot of experience, two things happen. It becomes less clear how to succeed, or not how to succeed, maybe how to grow. And it becomes far more important for you to understand the nuance in the system you're participating in. What your brain wants to do is take all the library of experience, every book, chapter, every page, apply it literally into the environment you're in. But often what a company is asking for you is like line 4 in chapter 3 of book 1, just that line. But your brain goes, no, but then all the rest of the book must be true. And I've experienced. And then I've got to figure out how to take those pieces and assemble them to be right sized for the value that we need to provide.
What's an example of a chapter in your own book that is really important to you, but maybe not necessary in your current role at Yoko that you've left behind just because it's not needed?
A really good question. I suppose there are a few. One is the concept of to scale a team is something that I've had to really nuance in my time here. So like that's something I've had to leave behind in terms of framework driven, only a couple ways to do it. Certain things always true. And I've just gone, nope, that's not what's happening. We're in a scale up / startup and a bit of this thing, which could be generative research. We need a lot of this thing, which could be prototyping. We need, and again, this is something that I spend a lot of time on. Whenever I've built a team, every single person that we hire and bring in needs to bring something we don't have in a meaningful way. And so I think that's like one of the big things. I think the other thing is just I've had to help my teams because I've hired very experienced people, or I had to really help them navigate their own libraries, right, of experience. And what I would normally do is let people run. And if they need to run into a wall, then they'll run into a wall and I'll be there to patch them up, whatever, and really support them. But with this, it's been a lot more nuanced and a lot more kind of like, okay, I can feel we're going too far down the religion of design, is the way I put it sometimes. And we need to come back to we are participating in a commercial system and must provide value as such. And I think that's been really interesting for me over the last few years, and is really trying to go, okay, well, what is this company actually asking for you? Because they'll use words that sound like other things to you, and you'll both use the same words to each other, but they mean different things. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've spent my time really going, okay, I need to not do it like I did it there, or I need to not think of it it's always a 747 jet that we're building, even if we're starting only, with a skateboard. Although if a skateboard flew, that would be amazing. Sorry. So yeah, I think that's the main thing for me, is that I have had to leave it behind, but I think it's just on the shelf in the library, right? I think that's the big thing for me.
What advice would you have for a designer who's early in their career and wants to bring more self awareness and humanness to their work?
Like I said, there's no way to get it right. There is only the journey. And if you're starting out, the thing that you have is opportunity more than anybody who's been doing it long. Like I said it earlier, somebody who's quite established in their career, the practical realities and the kind of like their brand and what they're marketing to the market in general, opportunities do get less unless you want to do a full reinvention. If you're starting out, your opportunity to reinvent and try things out and find out about yourself and make mistakes is kind of infinite in many ways. And be okay with that discomfort, and find the people that can trust and support you, but the people that aren't going to just tell you what you want to hear, the people that are going to also just help you reframe your perspective. I would say that's like the most important thing. I think ask questions, be curious. I mean, they sound like cliches, but they're so underutilized genuinely, because you get stuck in gear very quickly as a human being. And so I would say, yeah, and try things, design different things, design for very different people. Don't just do what you think is just what the market's asking for. If you're starting out, your opportunity to work on weird things can be one of your most marketable things in the future. And that can help you build your awareness of how you design, who you design for, with, etc. Yeah, I mean, that's genuinely, I think, what I would say is the most important thing, because if you can be your most aware self, probably the most marketable self too.
Cool. I appreciate it, Dane. You've left us with some really awesome advice. If anyone wants to follow your work online or connect with you, where could they find you?
LinkedIn's probably the best. Just full name, Dean Broadley. I'm technically on X. Broadly Spoken is my tag. And that's really it.
Fantastic. Thanks again for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it too.
A huge thank you to Dean Broadley for sharing his inspiring story and valuable insights. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Pixelated Path to continue hearing from top designers and industry leaders. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Abad, and we'll see you next time on Pixelated Path.